All right, Mike Gill, Hunter Brody right now. Michael Kaskey-Blomain from CBS Sports covers the NBA and the Sixers. He joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He has a bunch of Michael Jordan what-ifs as we're all watching The Last Dance. We're all kind of going back to our childhoods and remembering all the Michael Jordan moments. He's got some moments that didn't happen. What-ifs? We'll bring Michael into the conversation here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Hey, what's going on, my man? How you been?
I'm doing pretty good, Mike. How about yourself?
We're hanging in there. We got a bunch happening with this Michael Jordan stuff that everybody, first off, a year ago today, Kawhi Leonard hits the shot, and I guess with no basketball, thinking back to that moment and all the what-ifs that happened after that, just for the Sixers is a whole nother column for you.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. That could be a couple years down the road. Looking back on that moment, that could end up being a huge turning point for the Sixers, a team that was, the way things had shaken out with injuries. They had a chance to win the title last year. Really well, stacked team, Jimmy, JJ, the whole squad. And, depending on how things turn out down the road, that could end up being a time where you're like, wow, they were so close. And unfortunately, it slipped through their hands.
Yep, and you wonder, if they would have won that game, if they would have beat the Bucks. If they would have beat the Bucks, would they have gone on to the finals and, been able to beat the Warriors? Would Jimmy Butler still be here? Would Tobias Harris be here? I mean, a lot of things. You would imagine if they won that Butler may have been back. I mean, so there's so many different what-ifs that emerge from that situation. But what about Jordan, who, by the way, closed his career up against the Sixers while playing for the Washington Wizards? And it's funny, we just went through a couple of draft situations for the Sixers. What if they drafted C.J. McCollum at 6? And what if they got Giannis at 11 instead of Michael Carter-Williams? But there were other teams that had a chance to draft Michael Jordan, we forget sometimes.
Yeah, it's almost ironic now, given the status that he's attained as pretty much consensus the greatest player of all time. But people that didn't know or tend to forget, he was obviously the third pick in that '84 draft, and it's funny because you don't hear too much criticism from people criticizing the Rockets very much, considering the fact that they passed on Michael Jordan. But they took Hakeem Olajuwon, and at that point the logic was the NBA was an inside-outside game. If there was an opportunity to draft a potentially franchise-changing big man like Hakeem, you did it. Guards came second, and that logic that stood for a long time, all the way up till you could say up till the 2007 draft with Kevin Durant and Greg Oden, where the Blazers decided to go with Oden over a perimeter player in Durant. So, obviously a lot of the criticism you hear at the Blazers for taking Sam Bowie second overall, but they had Clyde Drexler that they had just drafted the year before, who had a similar skill set and played a similar position to Jordan. And there was, at that point, it wasn't known that Jordan was going to become so much better than Clyde. Clyde obviously went on to have a Hall of Fame career in his own right. But at that point, the Blazers didn't want to spend 2 consecutive picks on similar skill set players, so they went with a big guy in Sam Bowie. Obviously, that turned out to not work out so well. And then the Bulls had, Jordan fall into their lap, and obviously the rest is history.
I think that is the most interesting part of this when you look at the draft picks and how they were actually picked, because even though Hakeem Olajuwon had a great career and he won titles, we're talking about the greatest of all time. I mean, Michael Jordan is talked about as the greatest to ever do it, and he brought home 6 championships. So the fact that the Rockets kind of get a free pass, that seems ridiculous in my opinion, with how we praise what MJ did on the floor.
Yeah, Hunter, I agree to an extent, but at the same time, we have the benefit of hindsight. And then at that point, as good as Jordan was coming out of college, obviously the highest hyped college player, he hit the shot to win the national championship over Georgetown. There was still, it was almost impossible to tell that he was going to be, as good as he became. And I don't think the Rockets necessarily get a free pass, but it's just a situation where Hakeem also, ended up going on to be arguably a top 10 player, top 15 player in league history. And it was just at that time, it was just, now when you're thinking about drafting, big men are an afterthought pretty much, unless they're, super versatile and able to shoot and run up and down the floor. But at that time, it was almost the opposite, where, if you had the opportunity to get a big guy, you would start, that's where you would start to build your team. You would, get him and put him in there. So, the thought process was, at least, there was some rationale behind it, and it wasn't like they just whiffed in order to get, no benefit out of it. They got 3 finals appearances, 2 championship banners, albeit, one of those banners came when Jordan was retired. But, at the end of the day, if they could go back and do it, I think they would, any team probably would at this point take Jordan. But as a consolation prize, if you want to look at it that way, I guess Olajuwon didn't end up being, that bad.
No, but the one, Eric, I mean, can you imagine today if you're Portland and you have Clyde Drexler and you decide, we already have Drexler. We have a slashing scorer, so I'm not going to take another one. And you take Sam Bowie instead. I mean, today, finding multiple players who have similar skill set is not a big deal. But back then it was, you have a 2 guard. Now I need a center. You had to find the definitive 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah, absolutely. The league was much more position-oriented back then, Mike. It was like you said, it was much more rigid. The positions didn't overlap as much as they did, and there wasn't quite as much an emphasis on the athletic wing player as you would see today. If there was guys with the skill set, 2-way guards that are 6'6" and athletic that can play defense and shoot, both Drexler and Jordan could, you wouldn't think, that's almost a dream for a lot of GMs in the NBA today, and it just goes to show you how differently. It was only, a couple decades ago, 3-4 decades ago, but how much the game has changed and what the emphasis is placed on. Then today, those guys, a team that lucked into 2 players like that, it was a thing. But then, if you use consecutive first-round picks on guards as opposed to big men, that's just not how teams were built.
Speaking of versatility, what he did at the point guard position was pretty crazy. I mean, in 24 regular season games, 30.4 points per game, 10.7 assists, 9.2 rebounds, 12 triple-doubles. Do you think that they could have had the same success if he was a point guard long-term?
That's fascinating because, that aspect of Jordan's career is, it's little talked about. It's almost a footnote at this point just because of how much how many memorable moments and how much greatness he achieved over the course of his career. But he was excellent in that role for the Bulls at that point in time. And, it was a situation where he was setting things up for the other guys because obviously if he has the ball and he's bringing it down the court, all the eyes are going to be on him. He's going to draw doubles, and by default, he's going to have, open opportunities for other teammates. But ultimately, he felt that it was, after that season, he felt that it was almost too much of a burden to, have the defense on him constantly and having to be the guy that's not only, scoring 32 points a game. He led the league in scoring that year, but also setting up the plate and the table for all his teammates. So, it's fair to wonder if he did stay at the point guard position long term, if potentially fatigue caught up with him, even quicker than it did in reality, because, that played a big role in him stepping away in 93. He was kind of, just fatigued with the entire situation. If he had carried that bigger burden of playing a point guard for, his career, potentially that set in, even earlier. But given how good he was and the success that he had at that position, you would have to think that they would certainly have gone on to win, at least some titles, if not 6.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, CBS Sports, covered the NBA and the Sixers here on the Sports Bash. So we're looking at Michael Jordan what ifs. I think there's 2 wrapped into this one here, which is, or really wrapped into your final 2, there's a third, is what if Jordan never retired to pursue a baseball career? That would be one, because then you wonder if they would have won those 2 other championships. The Bulls fall short the one year, and then the next year he comes back and late in the year, but they fall short again. But if he's there for both of those seasons, could they potentially have won 8 NBA championships in a row?
Yeah, there's usually 2 lines of thinking there, Mike. There's the people that say, absolutely, if he hadn't retired, they would have ran through 8 straight. Those 2 years that the Rockets were able to win the title, that's would have went to Jordan and the Bulls for 8 straight. And then there's the other kind of line of thinking that is, ultimately something would have happened during that stretch, whether it was, mental fatigue and injury to Jordan or to Pippen or something that would have knocked them off the path and prevented them from winning 8 straight and potentially even ended, the dynasty a little bit earlier than 98. Maybe they would have went on and won that title in 93, 94, but then something happened the following season where it shifted the course of their seasons moving forward. So, I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. They possibly could have won, potentially a 7th title, but at the same time, to be able to keep that up over the course of that many seasons without, either getting tired or an injury. It's just really, extremely difficult. The Warriors were a team that people thought were going to be able to run off, multiple consecutive titles recently now, and they had, 3 and 5 years is a great run, but it's not, what was projected initially. And over time, it's just really hard to maintain that. Steve Kerr was asked about that, and he said, basically that it would have been impossible for the Bulls to do that. A big reason that the team was able to go on to win that second three-peat is, specifically because Jordan got away from the game of basketball and all the pressure that came with, the constant media attention, kind of got to get away from that, the whole, basketball landscape for a while and kind of refresh and recharge his batteries, kind of propelled him and gave him the new drive when he came back to win that second three-peat. And if he hadn't gotten away from that game, that probably wouldn't have been there.
That's interesting because my brain goes the other way with it. What if there was no strike and he stayed with baseball and he did not return to basketball? And think about the what if then. Now you don't even get that second run of 3 championships in a row.
Yeah, and then you're looking at some teams from the 90s that, weren't able to win a title during those later Jordan years, specifically because they ran into the Bulls, probably getting a shine and then having history look down at them differently. Karl Malone and John Stockton come to mind as 2 players that are, some of the best players in NBA history, but it might be a little bit lower on, the hierarchy of people's all-time list because they never won a title. But, with Jordan gone those last 2 years, they were, by far and away probably the best team in the NBA. They would have hung a banner, potentially that Peyton Sonic team, potentially, the Magic Penny duo that, played against the Bulls and beat them the last time they did. Potentially that team goes further. So that's another one that's not talked about as much, but it could have went the other way. Especially after watching The Last Dance and seeing, guys like Terry Francona and stuff saying that Jordan, had the skills to potentially continue his baseball career if that strike hadn't happened. So that's definitely kind of the flip side of, that situation.
Well, right. And I was going to say, this third one, you had 4. You could really add, yours. Fourth is what if the Bulls didn't break up in 98, but what if there was no strike and Jordan never returned to the Bulls to get that second three-peat? Because as Francona said, that if there was no strike, Jordan probably doesn't get the itch to go back to the Bulls. He gets the itch because there's no baseball to be playing. If he was still playing baseball, he might never have returned.
Yeah, so I guess it's pretty safe to say that the Bulls are probably happy that strike came about.
You would, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's probably one of the big what-ifs of all time is what if that strike never happened in 94? Would Jordan have finished or continued to play and pursued playing Major League Baseball? And then you have him going back because the strike ends and he goes back for the 94-95 season. They fall short. And then 95-96, 96-97, 97-98, they win back-to-back-to-back. So he ends up winning 6 straight, which probably makes his legacy much better than if he just won 3 and then walked away.
Absolutely, Mike. I mean, his legacy was already set. He was, being considered the greatest player ever at that point. But then to come back after a couple of years off playing a completely another sport and to come back and bring off another 3 straight titles, that, absolutely solidified any legacy that he, that was left to linger and any potential questions. That second three-peat was, it sealed the deal for him. And something like that probably won't ever be seen in sports again today. I mean, it would be the equivalent of if, LeBron and the Lakers won 3 straight and then he went to and played, baseball for a couple of years and then came back. Just something like that won't be seen again.
At the real Mike KB on Twitter, CBS Sports. He covers the NBA, covers the Sixers. Today, the NBA put out a text message with a yes or no that will be kept confidential. Do you want to try and play this season again? The union's trying to gauge the 400-plus players in the league. Do you get the feeling that the players want to legitimately try to get back there and play, or are you very intrigued by the way this answer goes?
I do think that the majority of players want to get back after it, Mike. There's probably some guys on some teams that, some lottery-bound teams that have had rough seasons with, that are already out of the playoff picture and, have been out of basketball shape for a couple months now that probably might not necessarily want to. But I think, the competitive nature of natural competitive nature of most of these players would make them want to get back. And then let alone, the teams that were in contention that had played all season and built toward the postseason, I think, they'd want to do whatever they could to potentially crown a winner at the end of the day. So, I mean, I will be intrigued to see what the results are, but I would be very surprised if they weren't, pretty predominantly in favor of resuming the season somehow.
All right. For more on the NBA, the real Mike KB on Twitter, and he joined us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. MKB, take care, bud.
Thanks for having me on, fellas.
Yeah, man. And he, like all guests, appeared to be the Boardwalk Honda Hotline.